Hello, welcome to the Sideboard here at the StarCityGames.com Modern Open in Syracuse, part of the SCG Tour, brought to you by Ultimate Guard. I'm Nick Miller alongside talk of the tournament right now through 10 rounds. Julian, Grace Martin, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. Thanks for having me.
I got rumors of a Hollow One Vengevine deck midway through yesterday, and we started looking for you. We found you, got you on camera to end the day yesterday. You just annihilated your Dredge opponent, and people want to know how'd you come up with this list? Because we see the interactions between the discard and Hollow One and Vengevine. People want to know.
So basically, when the set first came out, I saw Hollow One, and first I was thinking like, oh, that could be a cool card in Standard and stuff. And then Yul Larson wrote an article about deck in Modern. It was basically just Dredge with Hollow One added in. And so I was like, oh, maybe I could try in Modern. And so I'd already played Dredge on Magic Online, so I was kind of like, I don't really feel like doing that again. So I decided to just change it to an aggro shell, and I guess I just kind of like chose these cards, and I just kind of kept with them.
Okay, so the engine of the deck here is we have Faithless Looting, Cathartic Reunion, and Street Wraith. These are your discard outlets that allow you to get Vengevine into the graveyard, and then by proxy letting you play Hollow One for either 0 mana or 1 mana. Just because you're, when you cycle Street Wraith, that's technically discarding, and with however many cards you're putting in your yard with Looting or Cathartic Reunion, you just get a free 4/4. And surprisingly, 4/4, just like the Grixis Death Shadow deck, people can't deal with stuff outside of 3 range, and people kind of cut Lightning Bolt because of that. All right, so how did you come upon your 1-drops? Because you definitely shifted this into an aggro shell.
So first of all, I kind of wanted Swift Spear just because the deck had a lot of non-creature spells, and I also wanted a creature that had haste. Haste is really relevant against any deck with wraths because of you can become immense without getting hit by an Ugin or something. And for Goblin Guide, later on, I had Flame-Bladed Depth for a while, and I realized a lot of the time you wouldn't want to play it turn 1, because turn 2 you would want to go Neonate, discard Vengevine, and then cast another 1-drop. And Flame-Bladed Depth wasn't good because you spent your turn 2 discarding cards. So you wanted a creature that still did something on turn 2, because if your opponent Paths Vengevine, then you kind of put a bunch of bad cards together, or not just super high impact cards, to get into play. And I felt that Goblin Guide at least dealt an amount of damage that's worth its mana cost.
Right, that's the interesting thing about this deck is you're not playing a bunch of, as you said, quote, bad cards to make this engine work. The only questionable card really is Insolent Neonate because it doesn't attack for tons of damage, but everything else in your deck, when you're playing it, is attacking for a bunch of damage because of the amount of spells or just the, the size of, Hooting Mandrels, a specialty here, and then of course Hollow One and Vengevine all have a bunch of power. So did you have any other cards in the mix that you cut as you were kind of building the deck?
The first version I tried with Burning Inquiry, because you can cast Hollow One turn 1, which is a good thing. But the problem was, of course, you might discard the Hollow One. Usually if you cast it turn 1, you're a little less likely to discard it, but it still happens quite a bit. And second, it was worse when you mulliganed. The more you mulliganed, the more... Burning Inquiry is basically a mulligan that gives you high upside in some games. And it kind of worked well with Flame-Bladed Depth because it just gives it 3 power right there. And then when that card kind of came out, they kind of both came out as a package.
So how does the deck mulligan as a whole? You said you didn't want that because of the mulligans. Does it mulligan well?
I would say this deck does not mulligan that well because you're playing a bunch of cards like Neonate and Faithless Looting that by themselves put you down on cards. And if you're stuck with a Temur Battle Rage in hand, it doesn't get you... it's just kind of like a big burn spell. And so you probably, at least I can't say for sure that this is correct, but I tried to mulligan as little as possible. Mainly the hands that you want to mulligan are hands that obviously have no lands or very few spells. But in general, even mini 1-landers, as long as you have one of these cards that redraws, I try to keep those.
You can keep pretty land-light hands with the amount of digging you have, and plus you want to be doing that anyway, so it facilitates your game plan. The other interesting part that, I really like the Temur Battle Rage Become Immense package that we saw from, Standard to Tarka Red back in the day, coming in full force here. A lot of people not going to know this list, they're just going to get got by one of these 2 pump spells.
There are many games where my opponent just doesn't block a creature because they're at 12 and it's a Swift Spear, and Become Immense just digs you out of those games really nicely. That's mainly why I like it.
All right, so moving on to the sideboard, you have another Goblin Guide here, Grim Lavamancer, Domri Raid. You mentioned you have the extra Goblin Guide here because a lot of decks not quite sure what you're doing will shift to Graveyard Hate. You want to move into a more aggro burn shell.
Yeah. Mainly, like, when my opponent has turn 2 Stony Silence, or sorry, Rest in Peace, a lot of the time the delve threats are really important to winning, and so a lot of the time you just can't get to 6 mana because you're only playing 18 lands, and you want to discard lands, Faithless Looting, so on. And so if they're spending turn 2 doing nothing that actually affects the board, Goblin Guide is pretty good at punishing those draws. And same with the Relic, like if they play it and crack it, stuff like that.
All right, then we got some other cards here, some Destructive Revelries and Ancient Grudges. We don't know what those are going after. You also have this Blood Moon sideboard plan, which seems pretty cool. What are you bringing those in against?
So one of the biggest issues for this deck is like 3-color control decks that have like Path, Snap, Path, and then you just have a difficult time actually assembling enough. Because if you play 2 4/4s on turn 2 and like discard 3 cards to do it, and then they path both of them, you're like not doing well.
Yeah.
And so Blood Moon, I was trying to find a card that would beat control, and Domri Raid is like kind of does that, but it's also sometimes it just doesn't get you enough. So I decided Blood Moon could help beat like Abzan decks and Jeskai decks and Grixis decks.
Right, so that's like your package against the mid-range control 3-color decks. We got Roast here as another removal spell, 2 Leyline of the Void. We saw that come in against Dredge yesterday on camera, very good. And then 2 Feed the Clan. I imagine you want that against the burn matchup.
Yes.
Okay. What else is going on in this deck that we might not catch on first glance, or a tip or something that you can give the audience about this deck?
The main thing, I think the strangest part about the deck is that a lot of the time you'll just have cards to cast and you won't, because both of these care about what you've done on the turn. That, like, if you cast Faithless Looting turn 1 with Hollow One in hand, you don't get the bonus on turn 2 when you have another mana to cast it. And so, and mainly leaving up blockers, it's for haste creatures, that I found that usually makes it harder for me to get a surprise kill.
Okay. All right, well, you're off to a great start. You're 9-1 through 10 rounds. We're definitely going to get you on camera a couple more times because people have been clamoring to see this, so keep up the good work. Thanks for joining me here on the sideboard.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Stay tuned to StarCityGames.com all week long for the action here in Syracuse.